My family laughed. When I asked about my missing money, until the bank manager called them in, I held my small notebook in both hands because they had begun to tremble. Not from age, but from the weight of a question I already feared the answer to. Across the table, Jason was cutting his steak into distracted, impatient squares, while Amber scrolled her phone with the kind of exaggerated boredom she often reserved for my presence. Grace was eating quietly, glancing between us, as if she could sense the tension that wrapped around me like cold air. I cleared my throat and forced my voice to stay steady. Jason? I noticed several withdrawals I do not recognize in my checking account. I wrote everything down like I always do. Do you know anything about them? For a breath there was silence, the kind that presses against your ribs. Then Jason leaned back and laughed, a short, dismissive burst that made my cheeks burn. Mom, you are 76. You barely remember what you had for breakfast. Now you are auditing your bank account? Really? Amber lifted her eyes, slow and insincere, and smirked the way someone does when they smell something unpleasant. Maybe tomorrow she will accuse the mailman, or the TV. Old people always think someone is stealing from them when it is just their memory slipping away. She tapped Grace's arm lightly and added, "See, honey, when you live too long and never retire your brain, this is what happens." My notebook pressed into my palm, the edges sharp. I swallowed and tried again. I only asked because the amounts are not small, and Amber cut me off, her voice rising like a blade. If you lost money, that is on you. You should not even have online banking. At your age, you should have an allowance, like a toddler. Someone responsible should handle your finances. Jason shook his head as if exhausted by the burden of having a mother. Maybe we should get her evaluated. If she keeps making up stories about missing money, we will have to put her somewhere, for her own good. Somewhere, like a broken thing to be stored out of sight. Then he leaned forward and said the line that struck harder than any shout could have. You should be grateful we let you live here for free. Do not start biting the hand that feeds you, Mom. A hot sting rose behind my eyes, but I refused to let a tear fall in front of them. They would take it as proof of instability. I kept my voice small, careful. I have always kept records. I did not make those withdrawals. Jason scoffed. There it is. Paranoia. Classic dementia sign. She forgets something and then blames everyone else. For a moment, all three stared at me like a jury amused by a defendant. Grace looked unsure, but Amber nudged her spoon toward her and whispered, "Eat. Let your grandmother ramble." And in that moment I realized something else was happening, something colder than the missing money. They had already decided who I was allowed to be. A confused, fragile burden. A problem to be managed. An unreliable narrator of my own life. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I tried once more, though my throat felt tight. Jason, I am not confused. The withdrawals happened while I was at home, and I always— Enough, he snapped. You do not know what you are talking about. Stop creating drama. Amber folded her arms and gave me a long, pitying look. This is embarrassing for everyone. Just admit you forgot and move on. Their insistence felt rehearsed, as if they had practiced this narrative long before tonight. They wanted me uncertain, wanted me to doubt the very ground I stood on. And a terrible thought slid into my mind. Maybe this was not about the money at all. Maybe the money was simply their excuse to reshape me into someone powerless, someone they could speak over, someone who could not question them. The gaslighting settled over the room like a thick fog. I felt it entering my lungs, numbing my thoughts, trying to convince me that the precise records I kept for 50 years were suddenly the fantasies of a failing mind. But even as they talked over me, mocked me, dismissed me, something inside me stayed sharp. Not angry, not yet, just sharp like a needle pressing through cloth. They did not know that my mind was still intact. They did not know that every number in that notebook had been written with care I had practiced since my earliest days at the bank. They did not know that memory does not vanish simply because someone wants it to. So I stopped defending myself. I closed the notebook gently, the way one might close the door on a conversation not worth having. I excused myself from the table and returned to my small room, their laughter echoing behind me, too loud, too practiced, too cruel. I sat on the bed, opened the notebook again, and traced the entries with my finger. Each line was clear. Each date matched receipts I had filed in a small tin box beneath the bed. I was not wrong. I was not confused. The numbers were telling me a story they did not want me to hear. For the first time, I spoke aloud to the quiet room. "If they will not believe me," I whispered, "then I will find someone who believes the data." And with that, the trembling in my hands stopped. People think resentment grows from something big, but in my family it grew quietly, twisting itself around half-truths and memories no one bothered to look at closely. When Jason and Amber laughed at me about the missing money, their cruelty did not come from nowhere. It came from years of misunderstanding, years of refusing to see me as anything but a symbol of what they resented in their own lives. They had rewritten me long before that night. They had turned me into a villain they felt justified mocking. When I was younger, I was not the confused old woman they pictured. I was a risk control specialist at one of the largest banks in the state. My job was to detect fraud before it ruined people's lives. I read patterns like most people read faces. I caught discrepancies that even algorithms missed. My colleagues called me the human alarm because the moment something looked wrong, I felt it in my bones. I was proud of that work. It mattered. It protected families. I only wish it had protected my own. Jason grew up seeing me come home late, tired, smelling of printer ink, dry paper, and the faint metallic scent of cash that lingered on my sleeves after long hours reviewing transaction data. He never knew that on the nights I missed his school events, it was because some desperate person had tried to siphon a widow's life savings or a hacker had slipped into a vulnerable system. He only saw the empty seat, only heard the snickers from classmates. "Your mom loves her bank more than she loves you. Children can turn a knife with only a sentence." I did not know he carried that wound for years, but he also did not understand the impossible equation I woke up with every morning. If I worked more, I was accused of choosing money over him. If I worked less, we could not afford rent. In Jason's eyes, both choices meant failure. In mine, they meant survival. It is a cruel thing to do your best and still leave someone hurting. One memory followed us like a ghost. When Jason was 13, he begged to attend an expensive summer camp because everyone else was going. I could not justify it. Instead, I used the money to buy him a vest and shoes for an interview for a scholarship program he qualified for. I thought I was opening a door for him, but he did not get the scholarship, and in his mind, that failure became my fault. I had forced him to try something he never wanted. For years afterward, he held on to that narrative, that I controlled his future through my money, that every financial decision I made was a form of manipulation. It never mattered that all I wanted was to give him a chance his father never had. Then came Amber. If Jason carried old wounds, Amber carried fresh fire and needed someone to burn with it. She grew up in a middle-class home but treated frugality like a disease. The first time she saw me clip discount vouchers, she looked at me as if I had spit on her shoes. "Cheap," she muttered once, when she thought I did not hear. "People who live small stay small." That was her mantra. When she failed her startup, a project I had gently warned her about, not out of negativity but out of years of understanding financial risk, she lost a painful amount of money. "You jinxed me," she told Jason. "Her mindset ruins things. That poor person energy infects everything." Her words slithered into his resentment like poison. Soon, I was no longer just the mother who missed a school play. I was the reason he had not become the man he believed he should have been. Amber nurtured that idea with care. She reframed every sacrifice I had made. "Your mom did not sacrifice. She controlled. She chose work over you. She chose money instead of showing up. That is emotional neglect." And Jason, eager to understand his own disappointments, latched onto her version. It was easier to believe I had failed him than to accept that life had dealt him difficulties he could not control. Some memories he altered without even realizing, like the time he said I forced him to take a part-time job in high school. In truth, he wanted a new gaming console, and I told him gently that if he saved half, I would match it. He remembered it as coercion. or the time he claimed I mocked him for not getting into a top-tier college. In truth, I sat beside him for hours helping him apply to others, reassuring him he was still capable. But the story he carried, the one Amber reinforced, was that I had used money to belittle him. Amber had a talent, an unsettling one, for taking any insecurity Jason had and placing it neatly at my feet. If he struggled at work, it was because I had raised him in fear of failure. If he hesitated about a mortgage, it was because I scarred him with scarcity. If he felt inferior around her wealthier friends, it was because I kept him small. None of it was true, but resentment does not need truth. It only needs fuel. They built a version of me, a frugal tyrant, a joyless accountant who clutched pennies instead of people. In their minds, my caution became stinginess, my planning became control, my exhaustion became disinterest, and my love became cold arithmetic. They repeated that story until it hardened into truth for them, until they hated a woman who never existed. They hated the version of me they created because it shielded them from confronting their own regrets. Blaming a mother is easier than facing a world that disappointed you. The painful irony was that I had spent my life protecting them, shielding Jason from poverty and Amber from financial disaster. Yet in their rewritten tale, I became the enemy of their ambitions. So when money disappeared, they were ready to laugh, to accuse dementia, to dismiss me rather than admit someone had betrayed me. Because if my memory was intact, their illusion would shatter and they would have to face themselves. Living in my son's home felt less like sharing a space with family and more like renting a corner in a building where no one wanted me. They gave me a small room on the first floor near the back door, a space meant for storage or maybe a housekeeper, not a mother. It smelled faintly of detergent and old wood, and the window latch never fully closed, but I said nothing because I had learned that any complaint became proof that I was declining. They needed me to be the problem, so they made sure everything I did looked like one. The gaslighting began quietly. Amber would move my glasses from the nightstand to the kitchen counter, then tilt her head with feigned concern when I asked if she had seen them. "Nora, you put them in the wrong place again," she'd say, sighing like a disappointed teacher. Sometimes she hid my keys, then pretended to find them in ridiculous spots like inside a baking drawer or beneath the couch cushions. When I asked why they were there, she smiled sweetly. "You really do not remember, do you?" Jason would chuckle behind her, shaking his head as though amused by something inevitable. "How old are you again, Mom? 86? 96? I would correct him 76, but he would wave me off as if my age were merely my opinion. They began telling neighbors that I repeated stories 5 or 6 times an hour, even though I spoke so little during family gatherings that it felt like I had swallowed silence itself. I once overheard Jason telling the woman next door that he feared I was slipping fast, that it was like watching a candle burn down. She sympathized, offering him a casserole, while I stood behind the curtain, unseen, wondering when my real voice had stopped mattering. Amber escalated things. She placed a bright yellow sticky note on the stove reading, "Turn off the burner," signed with a little heart as if she were doing me a kindness. That afternoon, she turned the knob herself, leaving the flame on low so the burner warmed the air. When she brought Jason into the kitchen, the tone of her voice was triumph. "See? She forgot again. She could burn the house down." Jason took out a notebook, he had been keeping one I didn't know existed, and wrote down the incident with the solemnity of a detective collecting evidence against a criminal. When I tried to speak, Amber cut in. "We know you didn't mean to, Nora, but intent doesn't matter when safety is at risk." They created a narrative in which I was dangerous, confused, and unpredictable. At dinner, they would exchange glances each time I asked a question, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes sighing, sometimes shaking their heads in unison like a chorus that had rehearsed their roles. I felt myself shrinking. Doubt crept in, sharp and quiet. Was I repeating myself? Was I misplacing things? Was I fading? But at night, when I reviewed my careful logs, the temperatures I set while cooking, the bills I paid, the exact times I took my medication, I knew my mind was still intact. The numbers aligned perfectly. The patterns were consistent. I was not failing. I was being framed. The clearest blow came during the appointment with Dr. Harris. They insisted on taking me, saying they were worried about me. The moment we sat down, Amber leaned forward and began painting a picture of me, as if I were not in the room. She gets confused about days, accuses us of stealing, misplaces everything. The stove incident really scared us. We think it's time to talk about power of attorney before something worse happens. She said it with the tone of a responsible daughter-in-law, a tone practiced and polished. I sat frozen, feeling my cheeks burn. When Dr. Harris asked me the date, the president's name, the street we were on, I answered each question clearly. Amber did not miss a beat. "See," she said, giving a sympathetic smile. "She's having a good day. But it fluctuates. You should see her on a bad day." Jason nodded in solemn agreement. My voice came out small. "I don't have bad days." Amber squeezed my hand in a gesture meant to look loving. "Of course you don't remember them." Dr. Harris frowned, scribbling notes. A chill ran up my spine. They weren't just humiliating me, they were building a case to take everything from me, including control of my own money. When we returned home, I went straight to my room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. For a long time I stared at my hands, the same hands that had once handled fraud cases involving millions of dollars, hands that were steady even now. I opened my ledger and reviewed entries I knew were accurate. I traced each line with my finger, letting the precision of my own writing steady my heartbeat. "If they want to erase me with lies," I whispered to myself, "then I will protect myself with truth." They were crafting a world where I was helpless, but I knew how to uncover deception. I had done it for decades. This time, the fraud was in my own home, and I was ready to investigate. After 40 years in banking, I learned two truths. Numbers never lie, people often do. I carried that knowledge into retirement like an emergency key, never expecting to use it against my own family. Years ago, I helped build a senior protection system called Legacy Lock, designed to catch fraud even when memory faded or relatives interfered. I reviewed its authentication logic, voice verification, and escalation protocols. It became the gold standard for safeguarding elder accounts. Before retiring, I enrolled myself not out of fear, but instinct. I knew predators came in many forms, sometimes dressed as family. The morning after Jason and Amber tried to convince Dr. Harris I was losing my mind, something inside me clicked into place, not panic, but precision. If they wanted to weaponize my memory against me, I would use their fingerprints, their IP addresses, their careless arrogance against them. So I walked to the old downtown branch, ready to investigate my own home. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly when she saw me. "Mrs. Rowan, let me get Mr. Coleman." I had not asked, but of course he would want to see me. Coleman had been an intern when I mentored their fraud team. He once told me I was the reason he specialized in risk management. He came out quickly, offering his hand with genuine warmth. "Nora, what brings you in?" I met his eyes steadily. "I want to review the login logs on my checking account," I said. "And I want access to the ATM camera footage tied to recent withdrawals." His expression shifted from pleasant to alert, that subtle straightening of the shoulders I recognized from every professional who had just realized something was wrong. "Did something happen?" he asked. "Funds are missing," I answered, "and the explanations I have received at home don't add up." He nodded once. "Let's take a look." In his office, he pulled up Legacy Lock's backend, a system I knew as well as my own handwriting. The first red flag appeared instantly. Multiple transfers initiated from an unrecognized device. The IP address displayed on screen was painfully familiar, Jason's home network. My throat tightened, but I said nothing yet. Coleman expanded the audit log. Legacy Lock had marked several entries in orange, the color reserved for suspicious but incomplete attempts. Someone had tried to bypass voice verification by playing a pre-recorded clip during a high-value transaction. The audio file Legacy Lock captured was distorted, but even through the static I could tell it wasn't my voice. The pitch was wrong, the cadence is stiff. Someone had tried to imitate me, and Legacy Lock had stopped it, notifying Coleman automatically behind the scenes. Coleman glanced at me. "You didn't authorize these." It was not a question. "No," I said quietly. "I did not." He sat back, exhaling slowly. "Do you want me to contact your son?" I felt a clarity that cut through every bruise of the past months. No, I said. Not yet. I want the full picture before anyone gets warned. I saw his respect deepen. He understood this was not a frail woman confused about her savings. This was the woman who once found a multi-million-dollar laundering ring because a decimal point felt wrong. Let's check ATM footage, he said. We pulled up the camera feed tied to withdrawals over the last 4 weeks. The first clip loaded. There was Jason, standing in front of the ATM, shoulders hunched slightly as if he hoped the angle hid his face. But Legacy Lock had high angles. It saw everything. He inserted my card, typed my PIN, and withdrew cash. I felt something inside me twist, not heartbreak, but confirmation. Betrayal hurts less when you've already suspected it. The next clip began. This time Amber stood beside him, arms folded, tapping her foot. Her voice came through faintly but clearly enough. Just do it. She's losing it anyway. That money's basically ours. Jason turned toward her. What if she checks? Amber snorted. She can't even remember where she puts her shoes. By the time she notices, we'll have everything transferred. My hands tightened on the arms of my chair. Coleman's jaw flexed. Another clip. Another withdrawal. Each one more careless than the last, their confidence growing with the assumption that I was too old, too confused, too blind to see the theft happening right under my roof. They thought age was the same as ignorance. They thought experience evaporates when your hair turns gray. Coleman stopped the footage. Nora, he said carefully, this is criminal. I nodded once, controlling my breath. I know. We can initiate a fraud investigation immediately. Not yet, I said again. I want everything documented. Every login, every clip, every attempt. I want a complete chain of evidence. He studied me for a moment, then his expression softened in a way tinged with admiration. You always were thorough. I almost smiled. Thoroughly keeps innocent people alive, I said, and exposes guilty ones. When I walked out of the bank, the sun felt harsher, the wind sharper, as if the world itself had become more honest. I had proof, not guesses, not suspicions. Proof, but the video showed something more important than theft. Amber was the architect, Jason the willing tool. And beneath their actions was a simple truth. They believed I was disposable. They believed my mind was fading. They believed my money belonged to them. They were wrong. I stood at the curb, my purse held tightly under my arm, and whispered to myself, I have stayed silent long enough. And for the first time in months, I felt something I thought I had lost, a sense of power returning to its rightful owner. The phone rang at 7:14 p.m., just as Jason and Amber were finishing their second glass of wine. I was in my small room wiping down my glasses when I heard Jason answer. His voice was calm at first, then dipped into unease. Yes, this is Jason Rowan. Tomorrow? All 3 of us? Why? He went quiet, listening. Then, yes, we'll be there. When he hung up, Amber smirked, swirling her wine. Let me guess, the bank wants us there because your mother complained again. Perfect. Maybe now the manager will tell her to her face that she's delusional. Jason exhaled sharply, annoyed, but I saw the flicker of concern in his eyes. They had no idea what Legacy Lock had already shown us. They had no idea I had stopped being quiet. The next morning, the air was unusually still. I dressed simply and neatly, as I always had for work. Ironed blouse, neutral slacks, hair pinned back. Clarity has a way of making you stand straighter. Miss Rivera, my attorney, picked me up in her dark sedan. She had reviewed everything the night before, and I could tell by the firm set of her jaw that she was ready. You did the right thing coming forward, she told me. I nodded. I should have done it sooner. Maybe, she said, but timing doesn't erase truth. When we arrived at the bank, Jason and Amber were already inside, pacing near the front desk. Amber's eyes widened when she saw Miss Rivera at my side. Why is a lawyer here? She snapped. Are we being sued for helping you, Mom? Jason crossed his arms, his voice dripping disdain. This is ridiculous. You didn't need to make a spectacle. I let their words fall away. The time for absorbing cruelty had passed. Mr. Coleman greeted us with a seriousness I recognized from years of fraud investigations. He ushered us into a private conference room, the kind used for sensitive matters. Jason slumped into a chair, like he owned the room. Amber sat tall, chin raised, already rehearsing her indignation. Coleman began, his tone formal. "Thank you all for coming. We have concerns about recent transactions associated with Mrs. Rowan's accounts. We want to clarify the situation with everyone present." Amber jumped in immediately. "Yes, please do. She keeps insisting money is missing, but she forgets where she spends it. This is becoming exhausting." She said it loud enough to imply she was the victim. Jason nodded. "Honestly, I've had to help her with so many things lately. If withdrawals look strange, it was probably me helping her, with her consent. She just doesn't remember." Coleman clicked a button on the monitor. The audit log appeared. Times, dates, device IDs, IP addresses. A neat pattern if you knew how to read it. "These transfers," Coleman said evenly, "originated from a device not registered to Mrs. Rowan." Amber flicked her wrist dismissively. "She uses our Wi-Fi. It's normal." "Yes," Coleman said, "but she has not logged in from this device before, and the system flagged it as suspicious." Jason forced a laugh. "The system must be mistaken. She gave me her login. She forgot." Coleman looked at him steadily. "Then why?" he said, clicking again. "Do we have a forged signature on file for transaction #4827? The screen now showed a digital signature captured during a transfer attempt. Anyone with trained eyes could see the inconsistencies, the slanted angle, the unnatural breaks, but perhaps the most damning evidence was what came next. Coleman selected another file. A waveform appeared on the screen. "Legacy lock requires voice verification for high-value actions. Here is the voice our system received during the authentication attempt." He pressed play. A strained, awkward imitation of my voice filled the room. The pitch wavered. The phrasing sounded rehearsed. Amber's lips tightened. Jason's face drained of color. Coleman let it finish before speaking. This voice did not match Mrs. Rowan's biometrics. The attempt was rejected. Jason opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I watched him struggle to assemble a lie, but Legacy Lock had already stripped him bare. Still, Amber tried to seize control. "This is absurd," she snapped. "She used to work here. Maybe she knows how to manipulate your systems. Maybe she set us up." She threw her hands up dramatically. "Old people get crafty when they're scared of losing relevance." Miss Rivera turned her head slowly toward Amber, her expression razor-sharp. If Mrs. Rowan had manipulated anything, the audit logs would show it. But they don't. They show your IP address, your device, your husband's PIN entries, your voice on camera telling him she doesn't need that much money anyway. Coleman clicked again, and the ATM footage appeared. There stood Jason, withdrawing my money. Next to him, Amber leaned in, whispering sharply, her words captured clearly enough. "Just do it. She's losing it anyway. That money's basically ours." The room went still. Not fragile stillness, dead, incriminating stillness. Jason buried his face in his hands. Amber attempted one final attack. "This is taken out of context. She worked at a bank her whole life. She probably had all this planned. People like her, people who grew up poor, they get obsessed with money and sabotage everyone around them." Coleman interrupted her, his tone firmer than before. "Miss Rowan is not under investigation. You are." Then he folded his hands. "Under state law, these actions qualify as elder financial abuse." He paused, letting the weight settle. "We are legally required to file a report with Adult Protective Services. Additionally, Mrs. Rowan's accounts have been temporarily frozen to protect her assets. She remains the sole owner. Neither of you will have access moving forward." Jason's head snapped up. "What? You can't do that." Miss Rivera replied coolly. "They can. And they have. You had no legal right to access her funds, let alone impersonate her identity." Amber's voice cracked for the first time. "This is insane. We were just helping her." Coleman shook his head gently. "This was not help. This was exploitation." I sat there, calm, still, the way I used to sit when delivering evidence in boardrooms years ago. Except this time, the people on the receiving end were my own family. That was the only sting. But even that sting faded as the truth settled in. They had done this to themselves. As Coleman ended the meeting, he added quietly, "Mrs. Rowan, a full investigation will begin today. You will be notified of all developments." Jason stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, not as a confused old woman, but as someone who had never stopped knowing exactly what she was doing. And in that moment, justice stepped into the room, not loudly, not angrily, but with the clean precision of truth finally being spoken aloud. The courthouse felt colder than any bank vault I had ever stepped into. Though maybe it was not the building that felt cold, maybe it was the knowledge that my own son and his wife had dragged me here, hoping to lock me away. Jason and Amber sat across the aisle with their attorney, a smug man who wore his confidence like a cheap cologne. They had submitted a thick packet of evidence, claiming I was losing my memory. Pages of Jason's scribbled log blaming me for things I had never done, notes Amber had planted, exaggerated stories about me, repeating myself, and accusations that I had dangerous confusion episodes. It was a carefully crafted narrative, one meant to erase my credibility. Dr. Harris was called first. He adjusted his glasses as he took the stand, speaking cautiously. "I have observed some mild stress-related forgetfulness," he said, glancing in my direction. The family expressed concerns about early-stage cognitive decline. At the time, I could not rule it out. Amber nodded vigorously, as if the words were gospel truth. Jason folded his arms, satisfied. Then came the turning point. Miss Rivera rose and approached the bench with the calm of someone holding a grenade and waiting for the perfect moment to pull the pin. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit supplemental evidence." She laid down the legacy lock logs, every transaction, every forged signature, every failed voice verification. Then, she played the ATM footage. Amber's whisper, "She does not need that much money anyway," echoed through the courtroom. The sound of Jason entering my PIN echoed even louder. Amber flinched. Jason swallowed hard. Miss Rivera continued, "We also submit results from an independent neuropsychological assessment conducted last week. Mrs. Rowan scored within the normal cognitive range for her age, with no signs of dementia, early stage or otherwise. What she did show were symptoms consistent with prolonged psychological manipulation and gaslighting." She delivered those final words with surgical precision. Jason's attorney objected weakly, but the judge waved him off. Miss Rivera walked toward Jason and Amber, her voice steady. "Let us examine the standards this family imposed on Mrs. Rowan." She lifted the first page of their so-called evidence. When she worked overtime for years to keep food on the table, they said she loved money more than her son. When she saved enough to avoid being a burden, they mocked her as cheap and paranoid. When she noticed unauthorized withdrawals and asked about them, they called her delusional. So, I ask you, what exactly must Mrs. Rowan do to be considered correct in their eyes? Amber's face turned red, then pale. Jason avoided my gaze. Miss Rivera delivered the blow that stripped away their last veneer of innocence. "The truth is simple. When Mrs. Rowan's memory did not serve their agenda, they called it a problem. But the only problem here was their greed." The judge leaned forward, clasping her hands. "Mrs. Rowan," she said, addressing me directly for the first time, "I want to be absolutely clear. You are not the one on trial today." Then she turned to Jason and Amber, her expression sharp enough to cut through steel. "You created a narrative of cognitive decline to justify exploiting her finances. That is not a concern. That is manipulation." Amber sputtered. "We were helping her. She forgets things all the time." The judge interrupted her without raising her voice. "The evidence suggests the only people with selective memory in this courtroom are you." She listed her ruling as if reading their consequences straight from stone tablets. "Mrs. Amber Rowan, you are hereby charged with attempted identity theft and elder financial abuse. Given the severity of your involvement, this court will determine at sentencing whether a custodial sentence is appropriate." Amber sat back, as though the floor had vanished beneath her. The color drained entirely from her face. "Mr. Jason Rowan," the judge continued, "you participated in unauthorized access to your mother's accounts. While your involvement appears to be less calculated, it was still exploitative. You are barred from managing any of Mrs. Rowan's financial matters, now or in the future. You will also complete a mandatory elder abuse prevention program. Jason's attorney tried to object again, but the judge cut him off with a single raised hand. No further arguments will change the evidence. Finally, the judge addressed the matter of my finances. Mrs. Rowan will retain full and exclusive control of all her accounts and assets. Additionally, due to her demonstrated vulnerability to familial coercion, she is granted protective authority over her own estate. Any interference by the defendants will be considered a violation of this order. As the gavel struck, the sound was not just final, it was cleansing. The courtroom began to empty, but I stayed seated for a moment, grounding myself. Years of being told I was misremembering, exaggerating, or imagining things had almost become a shadow inside my thoughts. But shadows disappear in the presence of light, and today, the truth had shone brighter than any accusation they had thrown at me. Jason approached me cautiously, his steps uncertain. He looked older than his age now, guilty in a way that sagged his shoulders. "Mom, I did not think. I never meant for it to go this far." His voice cracked. I believed part of him meant it. The other part had enjoyed believing the story where I was the confused burden and he was the patient caretaker. I stood, met his eyes, and spoke softly. "You did not just try to take my money, Jason. You tried to take my memory. You tried to rewrite who I was, so you could feel justified." His eyes welled with tears, but I did not let him look away. "But I remember everything, every sacrifice, every insult, every choice you made." Amber remained sitting, frozen and shaking. She did not speak. She could not. As I walked out of the courthouse with Miss Rivera beside me, sunlight fell across the steps like a warm, undeniable truth. I had not lost anything. Not my memory, not my sanity, not my dignity. They had lost the only thing they ever wanted from me. And justice, at long last, had found its way home. When I returned to the house after the hearing, the air inside felt different, as if the walls themselves knew something irreversible had happened. I went straight to my small room near the back door and opened the old cedar chest where I kept everything that reminded me who I used to be before my son decided to rewrite me. I folded my clothes with steady hands, then reached for the box of old photographs, the ones of Jason, as a boy smiling with watermelon juice on his cheeks, wearing the winter jacket I saved for 3 months to afford, holding the bicycle I bought him with overtime pay. Beneath the pictures were the letters he used to write me on sticky notes when he was little. "Mommy, I love you. Mommy, don't work today. Mommy, I made you a rocket." I held them for a long moment, letting both the sweetness and the ache pass through me. These were the little pieces of proof that love had existed once, before fear twisted it and pride strangled it. Amber appeared in the doorway with her arms crossed tightly. "You can't just pack up and walk away," she snapped. "This is our house. You leave when we say you leave." Her voice was sharp, but her eyes betrayed panic, the kind that comes from losing control over the person you assumed would always remain small. "And do not take anything we bought," she added, "even though everything in my room belonged to me." From the kitchen, Jason stood stiff and silent, his shame louder than any words he could offer. I zipped my suitcase, lifted it, and walked past Amber without responding. Her insults could not touch me anymore. They bounced off the armor that truth had given me in that courtroom. Jason followed me to the living room, his breath unsteady, his face blotched with the red of someone who has finally seen himself clearly for the first time. "Mom," he said quietly, "I thought you never loved me. I thought you loved control. I thought you loved your numbers more than me." His voice cracked under the weight of his own confession. "I thought everything you did was to make me feel small." I turned to face him. He looked so much like the boy who used to wait for me at the window when I worked late, except now the disappointment was on both sides. "Those numbers you hated," I said softly, "paid for your medicine when you were sick, paid for your school supplies, paid for every roof we ever slept under. If that is control, then it is the kind that kept you alive." His eyes filled, but I did not step forward to comfort him. Love did not mean erasing the consequences of what he had done. Grace came running down the hallway with her small backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face tight with confusion. "Nana," she whispered, clinging to my coat. "Are you leaving because of me?" The innocence in her voice felt like something breaking inside me, something tender that still believed families stayed whole if they tried hard enough. I knelt and brushed her hair behind her ear. "No, sweet girl, I'm leaving so one day you will know what real love looks like. Love that protects, even from people it hurts to walk away from." Her eyes shone with fear, and I placed a small silver bracelet in her palm, the one my mother gave me when I was her age. "When you look at this," I told her, "remember that Nana never wanted distance. Nana wanted safety." Jason lowered his head as I stood, while Amber muttered something brittle and powerless. I drove to the bank and met Mr. Coleman one last time. Under the warm desk lamp, I changed every beneficiary. 70% to Grace when she turns 25, the rest to protect elderly victims like me. Jason and Amber received nothing, no money, no rights, not even a place in my future. When the final paper was signed, Mr. Coleman looked at me with quiet respect. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked. I nodded. "I am choosing the only person in that house who never tried to take anything from me." That evening, as I left the city behind and the road curved into a horizon that felt wider than it had in years, I whispered a truth that tasted like freedom. They wanted to prove I did not deserve my own money. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the weight of everything I had survived, and they were right. Someone did not deserve it, but it was not me. I drove toward a life they would never control again. When I finally settled into the little coastal town, the world felt quiet enough for me to breathe again. My small gray house near the shore let me wake to waves instead of footsteps outside my door. I joined a gentle reading circle and a slow yoga class, welcomed without judgment. A week later, an envelope arrived, Grace's handwriting, tilted and earnest, reminding me that love had followed me to this new beginning. Inside was a drawing of the ocean, the sky too purple, the waves too big, but her small note said, "Nana, I think your new home looks like magic." She told me about school, about a girl who sat with her at lunch, about learning a new song on the piano. She never mentioned Jason or Amber. She did not have to. Children know when silence is the safest truth. When I wrote back, I told her about the seagulls fighting over bread, about Mrs. Delaney from the book club, who always wore hats bigger than her head, about the crab that tried to steal my shoe near the pier. I did not mention the courthouse, or the lies, or those long nights when I thought I might lose myself. I wrote about kindness, responsibility, and dignity, things I wanted her to grow toward, not away from. News travels quickly in small towns, and even faster in neighborhoods filled with people who pretend scandals do not interest them. Within weeks, the people back where Jason and Amber lived learned about the hearing, not the private pain, but the public facts. Elder financial abuse, manipulation, false evidence. Mothers stopped inviting Amber to school events. Neighbors stopped waving at Jason during his morning run. Even the community page online turned cold. Someone posted, "Be careful who you trust with your parents." No names, but everyone knew. Amber, who once bragged about being management material, found herself turned away from every job related to finance. No one trusted a woman whose name sat in court records next to the words misappropriation and coercion. Jason faced his own reckoning. He was not a criminal in the legal sense, but he was guilty of something harder to escape, being the man who abandoned his mother when she needed him most. And the people around him treated that truth like a stain. Months passed before the next twist arrived. I received a call from Mr. Coleman's office asking if I could come in, not for a problem, but for an opportunity. When I visited, he greeted me with the same respect he had shown the day he helped uncover the lies. "Your case," he said gently, "has made its way into a training module for our newer staff. Anonymous, of course, but your experience is helping us tighten every policy." Then he added something unexpected. The bank wanted to hire me part-time as a consultant for their senior protection program. "You understand the system from both sides, professionally and personally. People will listen to you." I agreed. Not because I needed the income, but because the work felt like stitching meaning back into the torn fabric of the past. Soon I found myself drafting pamphlets, rewriting guidelines, and designing warning signs for people who did not realize danger could come from within their own families. One of the brochures carried a line I insisted on including: "If your family laughs when you ask about missing money, call us." It was not vengeance. It was a life raft for someone out there living a version of my story with no one to speak for them. One late summer afternoon, I stood on the beach watching the tide shimmer under the fading light, a calmness settling over me deeper than silence. As I turned to leave, I saw Miss Rivera approaching barefoot, shoes in hand. She handed me a letter, an update from the Elder Protection Foundation I had supported. My donation had helped save an elderly man whose son had drained his retirement. They secured his home and placed him in proper care. I read the letter twice, warmth spreading through my chest. My suffering had become a shield for someone else. That evening on my porch, with the ocean humming softly, I let myself remember Jason's laughter at the dinner table, Amber's sneer, the sting of being treated like a woman losing her mind. And as the tide breathed in and out, I understood just how far I had traveled, not only in distance, but in dignity. "They tried to make me question my own mind," I whispered into the wind. "Instead, they taught me to trust it more than ever." The waves carried my words away, folding them into the rhythm of the tide. A year later, Grace came to visit, taller, brighter, her smile untouched by the bitterness of adults. We walked along the shore, our footprints linking and unlinking in the sand, a pattern as natural as breathing. She told me she wanted to be someone who helped people, maybe a lawyer like Miss Rivera, maybe a teacher, maybe something she had not discovered yet. I listened, truly listened, the way a mother should, the way I once wished I could have listened to Jason when work swallowed me whole. And as she talked, I felt peace settle around us like a soft blanket. Justice had found me in a cold, precise way. But peace had come warm and slow, like the tide itself. And that was the ending I never dared hope for but finally received. And that, my dear listener, is how a quiet old woman reclaimed her name, her dignity, and the peace she had earned 1,000 times over. If my story reminded you of your own strength, or made you believe just a little that justice still has a place in this world, then stay with me. These old bones still carry many stories, some heavy, some healing, all true. If you want to hear the next one, come sit with me again, and make sure you subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support keeps these memories alive, and this old heart warm. I will be waiting for you.